When everything collapses, your plans, your pride, your peace, what remains? Most people break when fortune turns, but some evolve. Machiavelli lived through ruin, betrayal, exile, disgrace. Yet, from the ashes of his downfall, he wrote The Prince, not as a celebration of power, but as a survival manual for the broken. He understood that the world doesn't reward the strongest or the kindest. It rewards those who can adapt, endure, and rebuild. Resilience is not blind endurance. It's intelligence under pressure. It's the art of turning collapse into clarity, chaos into control. This is the lesson Machiavelli left us: how to rise, not despite ruin, but through it. Welcome to Resilience Through Ruin, Lessons from Machiavelli, the philosophy of surviving, transforming, and conquering when everything else falls apart. Every empire falls. Every man who rises high enough eventually meets the moment when fortune shifts, suddenly, violently, without warning. It is not a matter of if, but when. And when it happens, most people do not face the storm, they dissolve in it. Machiavelli understood this truth better than anyone. He was not born into privilege, nor did he rise through inherited power. He earned his place through intellect, diplomacy, and service to the Florentine Republic. For years, he moved among princes, generals, and powerful families. He believed in order, in the rational design of politics, in the human capacity for reason. But fortune, as he would later write, is like a woman, wild, unpredictable, and cruel to those who relied too much on her favor. When the Medici family returned to Florence in 1512, everything Machiavelli had built collapsed overnight. The Republic fell. His position was stripped away. He was imprisoned, tortured, accused of conspiracy, and then exiled, banished from the very city he had dedicated his life to serving. One day, he was a respected statesman, the next, a forgotten man. This was his fall. He could have broken. Many would have. Power, after all, is not just influence, it's identity. When it's taken away, who are you? For most, ruin means the end of meaning itself, but for Machiavelli, the fall became the beginning of something far greater. In exile, stripped of everything external, he was forced to confront the only thing left within his control: his mind. He began to observe ruin not as tragedy, but as revelation. When fortune turns against you, masks fall off, yours and everyone else's. The friends who once celebrated your victories vanish. The allies who swore loyalty reveal their price. The illusions of stability shatter. And in the silence that follows, what remains is truth. The truth of what you are without position, without praise, without power. Machiavelli saw that ruin exposes the architecture of reality. It reveals the hidden currents beneath politics, loyalty, and human behavior. He realized that most people are ruled by fear, desire, and convenience, not virtue. And he concluded that resilience is not moral purity or optimism. It is the ability to see the world as it is, even when it hurts, and to continue acting effectively within it. In The Prince, he wrote, "Fortune shows her power where virtue has not prepared resistance." It is one of his most misunderstood lines. He was not dismissing virtue, he was redefining it. Virtue, or virtue, in the Machiavellian sense, is not goodness, it is strength, adaptability, discipline, foresight. The man who falls because of fortune has failed not morally, but strategically. He built his life on foundations that the storm could reach. To endure the fall, you must build where fortune cannot touch, inside your own discipline, within your perception. You cannot control the turn of the wheel, but you can control how you stand when it crushes you. This is the first rule of resilience through ruin. Expect betrayal, expect loss, expect change, not with bitterness, but with readiness. The fall is not the end, it is the test. The moment the external world withdraws its rewards, your internal structure is revealed. Do you still have purpose when you have no audience? Can you still act with clarity when your name no longer carries weight? If your answer is no, then your strength was never real. It was borrowed from circumstance. But if your answer is yes, then the fall only refines you. It burns away dependency, illusion, and ego, leaving only essence. Machiavelli learned this in solitude. In his letters, he described his life in exile, tending to his small farm by day, then at night, changing clothes and entering his study to converse with the ancients. I enter the courts of ancient men, and am not ashamed to speak with them. He turned isolation into apprenticeship. The man who had once walked among politicians now walked with history. That is resilience. Not resistance to ruin, but transformation through it. When fortune turns against you, your first instinct will be to fight it, to cling to what's falling apart. But that only deepens your suffering. The wiser response is to observe. Watch how quickly the world shifts. Watch how fragile positions truly are. Watch how easily admiration turns into indifference. That observation will free you. Because once you see how unstable external power is, you stop worshiping it. You stop fearing its loss. And that detachment gives you control. The fall teaches you where real power lives. It's not in reputation, wealth, or favor. Those are shadows. Real power is self-command, the ability to remain centered when everything around you disintegrates. Machiavelli's tormentors could strip him of office, but not of insight. They could torture his body, but not his will to understand. In that, he was untouchable. The ruins became his fortress. Think of your own life. Every downfall, every betrayal, every collapse, these are not punishments. They are revelations. They show you where you built too shallow, where you trusted too easily, where you mistook comfort for control. Each failure redraws the map of what's real. The pain is information, unfiltered, undeniable, and precise. Machiavelli's exile transformed him from a statesman into a philosopher. He lost everything that could be taken, and in that emptiness, he found clarity. He wrote The Prince as a manual for those who wished to survive the world as it truly is, ruthless, shifting, unpredictable. But between its lines is another manual, one for those who wish to survive themselves. The first stage of resilience is acceptance. To look ruin in the face and say, "I see you." To stop running from collapse and begin learning from it. The world does not owe you stability. It never has. Fortune is not your enemy. She is your teacher. Every turn of her wheel reveals how much of your identity was external, how much depended on things beyond your command. When you accept this, you stop being a victim of fate. You become a student of it. Machiavelli's fall was violent, humiliating, and absolute. Yet in that destruction, he found his immortality. He turned personal loss into universal insight. He discovered that power, stripped of illusion, is not domination over others. It's mastery over circumstance. And that mastery begins with one thing: resilience, born from ruin. Because only those who have fallen truly understand balance. Only those who have been broken know what must never break again. And only those who have lost everything can finally build something that will last.
After the fall, there is silence, a kind of emptiness that hums beneath everything. The noise of ambition fades, the applause stops. You begin to hear something you haven't listened to in years: your own mind. This is where most people fail. They mistake silence for death, isolation for defeat. They seek distraction, validation, anything to drown out the void. But for those who understand power, real power, the void is sacred, because in it, the mind begins to rebuild. Machiavelli knew this silence intimately. Exiled, stripped of honor, surrounded by the ruins of his career, he turned inward. He wrote that he would spend his days in the fields, speaking with peasants and shepherds, his nights studying the ancients. Alone in exile, he met the most dangerous opponent any man can face, himself. And instead of retreating from that confrontation, he studied it. The mind after the fall is raw. It's wounded, unstable, unsure, but it's also honest. When you lose everything, there's no room left for pretense. The masks you wore for society are gone. The voice of fear grows louder, but so does the voice of truth. The second lesson of resilience is born here. The mind that accepts its ruin can begin to rule it. Machiavelli observed that fortune destroys men not because they are weak, but because they are unprepared for chaos. They mistake success for stability. When that illusion collapses, their identity collapses with it. To rebuild, the mind must detach itself from external identity. It must separate being from having. You are not your title, your wealth, or your recognition. These are tools, not definitions. In exile, Machiavelli began to reconstruct his thinking from the ground up. He asked, what makes men rise? What makes them fall? What is human nature when stripped of morality and myth? He discovered something unsettling, that people are not driven by virtue, but by self-interest, not by reason, but by desire and fear. This realization did not make him cynical. It made him strategic. He stopped expecting fairness from the world. He began to see it as a system, predictable, mechanical, and exploitable. This is the power of the mind after the fall. It learns to see the world without illusion. Once you've been broken by it, you can finally understand it. Pain becomes data. Betrayal becomes insight. Loss becomes refinement. Every scar turns into a line of information, a map of what not to repeat. But to reach this state, you must resist one thing: self-pity. The mind that clings to "why me" remains trapped in the ruins. Machiavelli never asked for pity. He accepted his downfall as part of the game. He wrote, "Men are not moved by gratitude, but by necessity." In other words, expecting loyalty or fairness from others is a form of delusion. The wise man sees betrayal as proof of reality, not an exception to it. In modern life, ruin looks different. The job lost, the relationship shattered, the reputation destroyed. Yet the pattern remains the same. The fall strips away your illusions and demands a new form of intelligence, emotional discipline. If you can analyze while suffering, you transform pain into perception. That's what Machiavelli did. His exile was a philosophical laboratory. Every night, he experimented on his own thoughts, dissecting his own errors, studying how power truly works in the absence of power. He realized that failure, when studied, is more instructive than success. Success flatters your ego. Failure reveals your foundations. The mind that dares to look at its mistakes without denial becomes indestructible, because once you understand why you fell, you cannot be manipulated by the same illusions again. The most dangerous part of ruin is not external loss, it's internal confusion. The chaos outside is nothing compared to the storm within. Doubt, guilt, rage, despair, all fight for control. Most people escape into distraction, but the strategist listens to the storm. He learns its rhythm. He studies his emotions as if they belonged to someone else. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. Machiavelli understood that emotional control is not the suppression of feeling, but the mastery of timing. To act out of anger is to lose control. To act with anger when strategically necessary is to wield it as a weapon. The mind after the fall learns that emotions are tools, not truths. You feel them, but you do not obey them. Every downfall has a hidden gift: freedom. Once you lose what the world values, you're free to pursue what's real. Reputation no longer dictates your decisions. Expectation no longer chains your creativity. You become dangerous Not because you seek revenge, but because you have nothing left to lose and everything left to learn. Machiavelli's greatest weapon during exile was perspective. While others saw failure, he saw opportunity for observation. He studied rulers and revolutions, not from the center of power, but from its edges. Distance gave him clarity. He saw patterns invisible to those still intoxicated by success. That distance turned him from a politician into a philosopher, and from a victim into a visionary. When fortune abandons you, your first instinct may be to chase her, to reclaim what was lost. But that's a trap. The harder you chase, the more you reveal your dependency. Machiavelli would advise instead, pause, observe, reconstruct your inner machinery. The world will always be chaotic, but the mind can become unshakable. Build that first. In the ruins of the old, a new architecture begins to take shape, one built not on chance, but on choice. You begin to replace reaction with reflection, panic with patience, pride with understanding. This reconstruction is slow, but it's permanent. You no longer chase fortune, you learn how to predict her movements. The mind after the fall becomes sharper, colder, and quieter. It stops asking for justice and starts designing it. It no longer believes that the world should be different. It calculates how to move within the world as it is. And that shift from emotion to strategy marks the rebirth of resilience. Machiavelli's solitude was not loneliness, it was transformation. Exile gave him space to strip away everything non-essential. What remained was pure thought, focused, relentless, pragmatic. He turned personal disaster into universal wisdom. He learned that ruin refines, that power built after loss is stronger because it has been tested by reality. The second rule of resilience through ruin is this: after the fall, rebuild the mind first. Everything else, wealth, position, recognition, flows from the quality of your thinking. If your mind remains fractured, your life will follow. But if your mind becomes disciplined, every future storm becomes an opportunity. The fall breaks the weak and awakens the wise. When the world collapses, most scream for rescue. The few who rise study the wreckage, extract the lesson, and rebuild with precision. Machiavelli was one of those few. His resilience wasn't born from optimism, it was born from analysis. So when you fall, and you will, remember, it's not the end. It's the clearing before reconstruction. The silence after destruction is not emptiness. It's the space where a new form of intelligence begins to breathe. In that silence, listen. Your mind is waiting to meet you again.
Ruined is not the end of power. It is the beginning of transformation. When the old structure collapses, the ground is cleared for something new to emerge. But only a few possess the instinct to rebuild, not from nostalgia, but from evolution. This instinct is what Machiavelli would call virtù, the ability to act decisively, reshape reality, and adapt to chaos with precision. Adaptation is often misunderstood. People think it means surrender, bending to the will of the world. But in Machiavelli's philosophy, adaptation is not compliance, it is conquest. To adapt ruthlessly means to remain in motion while others freeze. It is the art of surviving not by resisting change, but by directing it. When fortune turns against you, those who cannot change their nature are destroyed. The weak cling to what was. The wise exploit what is. Machiavelli wrote that a man who tries to govern with yesterday's methods in today's conditions courts ruin. History punishes those who refuse to evolve. Fortune favors the one who knows how to change shape, the one who can be both lion and fox, fierce and cunning, bold and strategic. After his exile, Machiavelli became a master observer of human transformation.
He studied how rulers maintained or lost power, not by their ideals, but by their flexibility. He noticed that survival belongs to those who can read the current of time, who sense when to strike and when to yield. Rigidity is pride disguised as strength. Adaptability is wisdom disguised as humility. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns against relying on constancy in an inconsistent world. He says, "A man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets what destroys him." The point is not to abandon virtue, but to understand that virtue without strategy is vulnerability. The world does not reward purity, it rewards precision. Ruthless adaptation means adjusting your actions to the moment without losing sight of your core purpose. Imagine a tree in a storm. The rigid tree snaps, the flexible one bends and survives. Adaptation is not about weakness, it's about knowing which parts of yourself must be bent and which must remain unbreakable. The untrained mind confuses movement with chaos. The disciplined mind sees movement as control. To adapt ruthlessly, you must cultivate this discipline, to remain calm in motion and strategic in uncertainty. Machiavelli's life is proof of this philosophy. Stripped of political power, he reinvented himself as a thinker. He turned from action to reflection, from diplomacy to philosophy. He wrote letters, books, and essays that would outlive the very rulers who had banished him. His name, once spoken in accusation, became immortal. He adapted not just his strategy, but his identity. That is the essence of ruthless adaptation, the ability to evolve your identity without losing your integrity. The man who clings to a single version of himself is doomed when the world shifts. But the man who can shed his old skin without losing his inner design becomes untouchable. You cannot destroy what can reinvent itself. To adapt ruthlessly, you must first abandon the illusion of stability. Most people spend their lives trying to make the world predictable. They build routines, traditions, and expectations to create a sense of safety. But the world is not stable. It never has been. The only constant is flux. The moment you accept this, you gain an advantage over everyone still pretending otherwise. You stop fearing change and start orchestrating it. Machiavelli described fortune as a river, violent, unpredictable, unstoppable. The fool stands still and drowns. The wise man builds channels to direct the flood. He doesn't curse the storm, he studies it, calculates it, and turns its power to his advantage. That is ruthless adaptation, using the energy of chaos to propel yourself forward. This principle applies not just to politics, but to life itself. When a relationship ends, when a plan collapses, when fortune betrays you, that is your river. You can fight it and drown, or you can study its current and use it. Every loss contains movement. Your task is to redirect it. Adaptation requires two traits: awareness and speed. Awareness to see what's truly changing, not the noise, but the pattern. And speed to act before the moment passes. Most people hesitate because they want guarantees, but power never comes with guarantees. Machiavelli would say, act first, understand later. Those who wait for perfect clarity lose the timing that makes clarity possible. Yet ruthless adaptation does not mean chaos. It is deliberate evolution. You must know your principles before you bend them. You must know your goals before you shift your path. Without this foundation, adaptation becomes drift, reaction instead of direction. Machiavelli's genius was that he combined flexibility with purpose. He adapted tactics, not intentions. His goal, survival and influence, never changed. Only his methods did. The art of ruthless adaptation also demands emotional detachment. To change effectively, you must separate your identity from your circumstances. The businessman who clings to his old market, the leader who clings to his old ideology, the lover who clings to their past version of love, they all fall, not because they lacked passion, but because they lacked perspective. Attachment to what no longer serves you is a form of decay. In moments of upheaval, ask yourself, what part of me must die for the rest to live? Machiavelli would answer, any part that resists truth. Adaptation requires small deaths of ego, of certainty, of comfort. Each death sharpens you. Each surrender to reality refines your strength. You don't lose yourself, you distill yourself. The ruthless part of adaptation is not cruelty toward others, it's discipline toward yourself. You must be willing to dismantle your own illusions, to question your own beliefs, to cut away the parts of your character that keep you chained to a dying world. This process hurts, but it's the pain of rebirth, not destruction. History belongs to those who move with time, not against it. Machiavelli admired Cesar Borgia, not for his morality, but for his timing, his ability to adapt faster than his enemies. Even when fortune abandoned him, Borgia acted with intelligence, not despair. That, to Machiavelli, was true power, the ability to remain dangerous even in defeat. The world today changes faster than it ever has. Technology, politics, relationships, everything shifts in real time. Most people are exhausted by the pace because they are still trying to live by yesterday's rules. The few who thrive are those who have mastered ruthless adaptation. They reinvent faster than they're broken. They observe without panic, act without hesitation, and rebuild without regret. Machiavelli would remind you, survival is not about being the strongest. It's about being the most adaptable. Fortune favors those who do not beg her for mercy, but who learn how to dance with her chaos. The third rule of resilience through ruin is simple but absolute. Change before you are forced to. Anticipate transformation. Watch for the signs. When fortune shifts, be already moving. Adapt before others even realize they must. In the end, ruthless adaptation is not about becoming something new. It's about becoming more yourself, the raw, unsheltered, unbreakable version of you that no circumstance can defeat. That is what Machiavelli discovered in his ruin. Not despair, but evolution. He lost his place in Florence, but gained his place in history. Change is inevitable. The only question is whether you will lead it or be consumed by it. Adapt ruthlessly or fade with the ruins of what you once were.